So basically by the end of this video, y'all should be able to identify benchmark fractions and percents by using diagrams and numbers. And we're really going to stick to one diagram. The benchmark percents we're going to be looking at include 10%, 33.5 or 33.33%, and 25%. Also 50% should be on there. Okay, so let's talk for a little bit about why this is important or why it's helpful. Take a moment to look at all of these like sale tag things on your screen. One thing you should notice is that they all either end in a 0, right? 70%, 20%, 50%, 50%, or they end in a 5. Okay, 75, 25. You may also notice that 25 and 75 are multiples of each other, or have a common multiple. And same with all these zeros. Remember, all of these zeros are multiples of 10. 50 is the same thing as 5 times 10. 70 is the same thing as 7 times 10. 2 times 10, right? 75% is the same thing as 3 times 25. So the thing with benchmark percents is if we know these common factors, the 10s and the 25s and such, that it makes figuring everything else out very easy. So let me explain what I mean by that. Okay, so here's our benchmark percents that you need to know and will be most helpful to you, not just in class, but also in the real world. This is one of those things that you will use every day, probably of your life. It's the thing that you need to know so that when you go to a cash register, you know if the discount's been put in, or if certain things have been forgotten. This is how you are prepared to defend yourself mathematically. So we always start off with the idea that a whole is 100%. So if you think about a test, if you get every single question right, you get the entire or whole test right, you are getting 100% on that test. Okay, so one whole is 100%. Okay, the next benchmark fraction is going to be 1/2. So if we take half of a whole, that means we are taking 50% of it. As a decimal, we see that as 0.5. So we can see here that our whole has been split into 2 halves. So half and half make up a whole. 50% is half of that, etc., etc. Our next benchmark fraction or percent is 1/3. So if we take a whole and we split it up into 1/3, that's where that 1/3 comes from. That means we've divided the whole thing by 3. The decimal equivalent of that is 0.33 repeating, and the percent equivalent of that is 33.3% repeating. This is one of those ones you really just kind of have to memorize. All of the other ones make sense, and this one does too. It's just not as easy to memorize because of the repeating decimals. All right, our next benchmark fraction or percent is fourths. This one's really easy to remember because we think of it as money, right? If you have one whole dollar and you split it into, if you split it into 4 whole quarters, okay, 4 quarters, each quarter is worth 25 cents. So the fourths or quarters are really easy to remember. And then if you remember 25 cents, then we know that that's 25% of a dollar. And then our last one, which helps us understand really everything about all of the other types of percents, is when we split things into tenths. Okay, we're very comfortable counting in tenths, so that's why this is helpful. If we take one whole and we split it up into 10 parts, that means each part is exactly 1/10. So when you split a whole into 10 parts, each part is worth 10%. right? And then if we have the decimal form of that is 0.10. So again, this one's really similar to money, right? If I have a dollar and I split it up into 10 parts, that means you're splitting it into dimes. So 0.10 or 10 cents. Okay? So those are our benchmark percents, and you're just going to have to practice referencing this and using this to make this a part of your memory. And then I promise, when you get older and you're doing and you have a little bit more financial responsibility, this is going to come in very handy. Ask your parents about it, I'm telling you.